Hi, guys.
Hello.
How are we doing today?
Well, how are you?
Good. Busy. Busy. It's crazy out there.
It really is. Even for like me as a new agent, it's just like the work is never done.
Yeah. I was writing offers till 11:30 last night, and my clients told me, "Oh, hold off. We're going to sleep on the price." Had me write a crazy, ridiculous, embarrassingly low offer or revise the offer amount this morning. So that was fun.
Sounds fun.
That will happen many, many times. I mean, I wish it never happens to you, but it will happen many, many times. I'm going to wait just a couple of minutes because we don't have that many people on the call right now. And we generally have about 10 times this number, I think. Hi, Nagar. Or not.
Hello, my beautiful. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. I'm glad to see your name. What are you up to?
I just got this robot vacuum because I let my housekeeper go.
Uh-huh.
So
Aren't they
I'm
the
listening to you doing housework, making calls. I went on a listing appointment a few days ago. It's been crazy, but like trying to just do whatever I can.
Right, right. Well, congrats.
Thank you. Thank you. It's I have a prospective buyer. I think I said it on your last call. Your last Zoom last week. She is looking, she's a doctor at UCLA and she's looking for, she's been pre-approved up to 2.2. I've been in touch with a loan officer. She's ready to go. She had a house in escrow that once they were in escrow, they found out that they had some foundational issues. And back then she was with another agent. So thanks to my daughter, she actually gets all the credit. She has introduced me to them and she recently changed to me. She's very, she's ready to go. She could close in 30 days or less. And we're looking in Beverly Hills, West Hollywood, Westwood. If you know of anything, please don't hesitate to ask.
Okay. Great.
I see you back to back to back. I'm so proud of you. You're amazing.
Oh, thanks. I've been running around like a crazy person, that's for sure. I usually have problems sleeping, but I've been dropping like just dead at night every night and sleeping a solid 8.5 hours. I normally sleep like maybe 6. I can't even stay, I can't stay asleep past that, but I'm exhausted because I've been blessed lately. Let's just hope everything closes.
I am proud of you. If I was a buyer or a seller, I would want to have you by my side. You are amazing. And I truly, sincerely mean it. I hope you know it's from the heart.
Thank you. Thank you, Nagar. Now that I've had my flattery session for the day, do you want to talk to my buyers and sellers and tell them that they should listen to me?
I would love to be on your side anytime, any day.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Well, I guess we're going to go ahead and get started. Actually, you know what? Let me lock my door really quick so that no one comes into the office during our class. All right. Today, we're going to talk about leases. So let's start off by saying leases are generally more trouble than they are worth, but we still do them. Why would we still do something that's not really worth the money? Any ideas? To build the relationship. So those property owners who are leasing are going to turn into sellers or buyers at some point. And those tenants, you have the opportunity to foster that relationship with them because, tenants hopefully turn into buyers one day. They are also great referral sources. So just because someone isn't able to purchase or have something to sell does not mean that you cannot obtain business through them through referral. Makes sense, right? So, it's very often the case if you have a lease listing that you more often than not end up representing both sides. Why is that? There are a lot of tenants that are not represented by an agent. So they'll contact you directly from, a website. So once you put a lease listing into the MLS, it feeds to apartments.com. It feeds to Zillow, Redfin, all of those sites. So more often than not, I think, generally speaking, more than half of the inquiries I get about a lease are direct from tenants looking for themselves. And, I only do leases for past clients or clients who have bought a property through me, but at the same time, I'm not going to turn business away. So I used to take lease clients that didn't end up getting, a lease listing I had. Now I have a team. Sorry, I have dog hair. Now I have a team, and I just pass those lease leads off to them. So it's an opportunity. It's not a whole lot of money, typically speaking. Now, on the flip side, we do have very, very high-end rentals in our area, right? We've all seen those $35,000 a month leases. That can be very lucrative, short-term or long-term. Oftentimes, those shorter-term leases, you can negotiate a higher commission, or a higher commission is offered to the tenant's agent. So let's talk a little bit about what you need to know. And we're going to talk about what the lease process is like from the listing side, from the tenant's agent side, and the whole process in between. So you need to know a lot of information if you take a lease listing. I would highly recommend not only filling out the lease listing agreement, which I'll bring up for you in a second here and do a screen share, but also the actual month-to-month residential lease agreement. Why? There's going to be information you need to address in the lease agreement that you probably need to know at the time you take a listing. Hi, Erin. So, if you're taking the lease listing, take out the month-to-month residential lease agreement as well, so that you can ask the property owner all of the questions that you'll need to know. And so you can answer questions for the tenant properly and fill out the MLS accurately. All right. Just so you know, there is actually more documentation required in a lease from the real estate agent end than there is in a sale. Funny, right? So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and do a screen share. If I can figure this out, of the lease listing agreement. Maybe. I don't know what I did with it. And here we go. All right, can everyone see this?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, copy.
Okay, so the lease listing agreement is pretty simple to fill out. You're gonna, of course, want to get your owner's names from title. You want to make sure that you're speaking to all the decision makers. Is a lease listing agreement valid if you only have one signature and there are two owners? No. So you need to make sure that everyone is on board, everyone is signing everything. If it's an entity, you'll need to know, such as a trust, an LLC, a corporation, you'll need to know who has authority to sign on behalf of that entity. The next line is for the broker. If you're on, in this class, you're going to be Keller Williams Beverly Hills. It's going to have a start and end date. Can anyone tell me what the typical time frame for a lease listing is?
A year.
Year.
Lease listing, your listing period.
Oh.
6 months, yeah. So it's the same as a regular listing. Can it be shorter? Can it be longer? Yeah, that's all up to you. I do lease listings for 3 months. Why? If I can't lease it for an owner in 3 months, it's either priced wrong or there's something wrong with it. I don't think I'm going to. Some of the things that you need to think about when you're pricing and taking the listing also is that because there's such a small amount of money involved for commission, you may not take professional photos. So So one of the questions you'll want to ask is if they have professional photos. One of the things that I will do on occasion is if the owners do not have the property photos, I will call, if it was a recent sale, I will call the last listing agent and I will ask them if I can purchase their photos from them, their professional photos, and I'll offer them like $100. And so that's my workaround for getting professional photos, but not paying, you know, the $400 or $500 it would take to photograph a property with a new photographer. I also gift them to the property owners at that time. You know, I don't want to be gross about it, but I make sure they know that, you know, I paid for them and that I want them to have a copy so that they always in perpetuity have the professional shots of their home for any future purposes, whether they work with me or not. I want to make myself all about customer service. So you're going to have the property address in here. Very important that you get the legal city right. So this property is in Encino, but Encino is the legal city of Los Angeles. Why is that? Well, this property is a single family residence, so it's not a problem, but multifamily in different cities has rent control. And rent control can be pretty tricky. As an agent, you should really not be involved in interpreting rent control for property owners. You will inevitably get roped into it, and you should not engage in it. You should instead do your best to provide resources and links to information regarding the rent control in the city. I mean, I do myself get roped into interpreting some of it for clients. It's inevitable, but unless you truly understand it, if you make any errors, you're going to be liable for it. And this can be big, you know, high expense error. So refrain from interpreting rent control laws for property owners. Instead, make sure you have a great resource. You know, if you think you're going up for a lease listing, you want to do research. Each city has different rent control, and if they don't, we do have state imposed rent control, but there are certain exemptions from that, and typically single family is exempted, but not always. All right. If you're dealing with City of Los Angeles, can anyone tell me a great resource to find out if something's rent control? ZIMAS. ZIMAS. So if you type in a property address on ZIMAS, it'll come up with this left-hand column of a whole bunch of ordinances and, you know, criteria. One of them will be something like RSO or rent stabilization, and it will either say yes or no. Was someone going to say?
Come here, go potty.
Oh.
Come here, Callie.
Greg.
I'm sorry about that. My
Okay.
dog is terrible.
No, not as bad as mine.
I'm so sorry, guys.
It's fine. It's fine. Okay, so ZIMAS is a great place for LA City. I'll also tell you another, you know, general rule of thumb. It doesn't hold true all the time though. So it's just a general rule. You do have to double check it. Is that typically speaking in the city of Los Angeles, single family and condominiums are not subject to rent control. Okay. Typically they are not, but they can be. And so ZIMAS is going to be your control for that. So multifamily property prior to 1978 in the city of Los Angeles is rent control. Then the state has imposed multifamily rent control statewide for cities that don't have rent control. And that applies to any multifamily property that is 15 or more years old. Okay. So if it's 2021, anything built in 2006 on is going to be subject to state rent control with the exemption of single family or individual condo. If the condo was never an apartment building that was rent control and converted into condos, right? It's not clear. It's very tricky. So again, you should know these things, but you don't want to advise your clients. All right, so let's talk about the listing terms. 2A, the rental amount. Who sets this price, guys? Come
You-
on.
Owner?
Landlord.
Owner,
Owner.
landlord, owner, exactly. Do you pull comps to help them with this? Absolutely. You're going to pull comps just like you would with a purchase or a listing. Now, I will tell you this, most rentals are not listed with agents. So you're only going to have a small fraction of what's actually been on the rental market in your comps. All right. So the only other resource for you is to see what is actively listed on places like apartments.com. But we all know that an asking price is not a relative comp, right? It just isn't. Only actually agreed to prices are relative. So I just want you to keep in mind that pulling rental comps is not always the easiest, and sometimes there's guesswork involved. So if you have difficulty with rental comps, I highly recommend that you convene with your coworkers and get some second opinions. It is not the easiest, even for myself at times. Okay. Type of security deposit. Does anyone know what the maximum security deposit is? What is the maximum allowed security deposit by law?
3 months.
2
Two.
months.
In different instances.
I think it changes if it's like furnished, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's up to 2 months unfurnished and up to 3 months if furnished. And there is zero deviation from this. Anything beyond that is completely illegal. And that includes all types of security deposit. They're all just considered total security deposit. So if our lease is $4,000 a month and it's unfurnished, we cannot charge an $8,000 security deposit and a $500 pet deposit. We can't do it. The maximum we can charge is $8,000. Make sense? By the way,
Do you charge the first month's rent also, Kristen, or no?
it depends. It depends, and I'll go over that with you when we go over the actual lease agreement. Sound good?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. You're
Kristen, a question about, Kristen, sorry, I have a question about pets. If we list something for 4,000, like you said, we can charge only 8,000. But if the owner wants to charge 150 as a pet deposit, how we deal with this?
Can't do it. It is
So we have to just deduct 150 from the 2 months?
can't deduct it. What the owner can do instead is charge a pet rent. That's one workaround.
Okay.
Most people look at that as, you know, a kind of a cheap shot thing to do. And there's an easy workaround for tenants with it. They'll get an emotional support letter for their animal. An emotional support animal, a landlord can't charge a security deposit or pet rent for. But yes, under no circumstance, no matter what, can an owner charge more than 2 months of rent on an unfurnished property.
Thank you.
Do the tenants need to disclose that they have an ESA,
No.
emotional support animal?
Technically, a tenant does not need to disclose that they have an emotional support animal. And there are two schools of thought on that, right? I like things to be upfront and honest. And I myself, if I'm representing the landlords, I tell them, I'm sorry, guys, you're going to have to accept pets. You know, you're just going to have to. Let's build in your security deposit high enough, right? Most people at this point have pets. Americans are really attached to their pets. And it's, you know, it'll take an hour and $100 to go get an emotional support animal letter. And no, a tenant is not required to disclose that they have an emotional support animal, but being upfront with a potential landlord is more likely, I would imagine, to start a relationship off well. Okay, so let's talk about type of tenancy. So we have options here, month to month, 1 year, or other. So typically, when I'm doing a lease listing, they want 1 or more years, but this is all the preference of your landlord. So you're going to ask them, okay? Items included in lease or rental. So this is blank, but really this should have said in my lease listing agreement, the stove, the refrigerator, the washer dryer, the microwave. So this is basically all the personal property that's going to be there. So it'd be really hard for you to fill that out without having seen it and having asked the owner, right? Items excluded from the lease rental. Sometimes a landlord will have a storage unit or a garage or something at the property, you know, a space even within the home that is excluded. So if that's the case, you would enter that here. Any additional terms. There are some funky things sometimes with leases, right? Everything in real estate's negotiable. Well, with leases, it gets pretty complicated. So this additional terms form is just a spot for you to fill in anything that's necessary. So for instance, I have another lease listing and it has an ADU. So the additional terms is, you know, that the ADU will be disclosed on the MLS and that the tenant for the home that, you know, the portion of the property that I am listing, they only have the right and access to the right side of the driveway. You know, so you can write anything you want in here. But as I say, with all contracts and all real estate documents where you have free form entries, you need to be very careful about what you enter there. It needs to be very clear and it needs to be thorough. Just because it's clear doesn't mean it addresses all of the things it needs to address. So anytime you're using free form sections, make sure you double check with someone who is really experienced so that you don't have any holes in what you're writing so it can't come back to bite you. All right, compensation. All right, so we have two sections here under 3A. We have 1A and B and A2. So a fixed term lease is our most common. That would be like the 1 year, the 18 months, the whatever. Can anyone tell me what the typical percentage of total commission for a lease is? Remember, this is by our tenant and landlord side.
2.5.
No.
5 for both sides.
5. Yeah, there's really not a whole lot of wrong answer here because I see lease commissions as low as 4% total up to a total of 10%. But the most standard is the 5 to 6%. I highly recommend that you see if you can charge 6% if at all possible because there is so little money involved in leases. There are times that I tally up my time and gas and expenditure and it exceeds what I make on a lease listing. All right. Don't write no compensation to listing agent. I did this lease for free because I sold this property to the owners. And I always tell my clients that if I sell income property to them, that I will lease it for them for the first time for free as part of my services. So you definitely don't want to write those words in there. The second option here is for a month-to-month rental. Okay. So your owner might be okay with a shorter term lease at a much higher rate. That is very common. They're like, okay, I will do a 1-year lease at $10,000 a month, or I'm willing to do a short-term lease, but for, you know, $14,000 a month, something like that. So on a shorter term lease, you can include both here, you know, 6%, 5%, whatever it is for the fixed term lease, or 10%, I think is pretty common for a shorter term lease. Whatever it is you decide with the owner, but you can use both lines at the same time within the same contract because they're referring to compensation in different lease instances, different lease terms. Okay. Fixed term month to month. Sorry. Okay. This part here, owner agrees to pay broker additional compensation of blank if a fixed term lease is executed and is extended or renewed. So let's say you put a tenant into a property. This basically indicates whether or not the landlord is going to pay commission on the renewal of a tenant's lease. And typically they do not. Typically they do not. All right, section 3. 3A, 3B. This is called the exclusions period. And just like your regular listing agreement, if you have a lease listing, you show it to someone and your lease listing either cancels or expires, the next agent comes in or the property owner leases direct to someone you showed the property to during your lease period, you are still entitled to the commission as long as you provided what is called an exclusions list, which is a list of all the names of the people you showed the property to. before your agreement with the owner cancels or expires, as long as you have a date time frame in here and it is within that time frame. So Aaron, you are my landlord. I couldn't lease your property. The day before our listing expires, I provide you a list of all the people I showed it to. Our listing expires, you list it with someone else. One of the people on my list comes in, they want the property. Your agent is out of luck and I'm getting that commission. As long as it was within whatever time frame from the date of cancellation of our agreement to the date it actually happens. So if I had one day in here and they came to you 2 days later, I would be out of luck. But the standard time frame to have in this section, guys, is 180 days. Can you do shorter or longer? You can do shorter. Doing longer would maybe be considered a little unethical because a lot can change. It may have been actions that the property owner or the listing agent took that brought that new buyer back besides just a price change. So I would say that anything over about 180 days would be considered kind of unethical. All right. If the owner is going to pay anything additional to you, so let's say the owner is going to reimburse you for professional photography because you negotiated that with them. And this is one of the only times where I do think it's appropriate to maybe try to negotiate with the property owner to cover some of the costs for marketing. Property owners always pay for staging, all of that themselves, but typically us as agents, we pay for the professional photography and marketing. With the lease, if they want professional photography and they don't have it, if I can't get it for cheap from the previous agent or from whoever sold it professionally last, I'm going to ask generally that the owner either pays for the photos or reimburses me for them. If they insist on professional photography. I will on occasion very carefully photograph a lease listing myself, but I have a pretty decent camera on my phone, and no joke, I spend about 4 hours editing those photos at home at night, and every time I do it, I'm like, damn it, I should have just paid the money. It wasn't worth my time. Let's see here. Section E is very important. There will be times that you put a tenant into a property, and at some point, they live there a long time, and at some point, the landlord decides they want to sell the property. It is not uncommon for the landlord to tell the tenant about this and the tenant express interest in maybe purchasing that property. So if you've completed section E, guess what? You're going to get a real estate commission if that happens. Erin, are you looking closer? You're like,
Yeah.
oh, what's that?
You have to make an appointment with the optometrist.
Well, I'm doing the same thing. I'm like, you guys like my forehead. Okay, so let's see here. So section F is the section where you're going to indicate how much of the total commission that the landlord is paying is going to the tenant's agent, or also referred to as a cooperating broker. Okay. Tenant payments. Okay, you as an agent are never going to take a tenant's payment and put it in the broker trust account. You are going to hold whatever payment uncashed and you're going to transfer it to the owner. Okay. If you're going to use a lockbox at the lease listing, you'll need to have this box checked. Otherwise, you can't. Same thing with the sign. Pretty self-explanatory. All right. So section 10, if the property was built prior to 1978, you're going to need to indicate so on this document, and something called the lead-based paint disclosure is going to auto-populate in car forms. You'll have to include that. It is required by law at the time of the listing and to be given to the tenant at the time that the lease is made. There are a whole bunch of other disclosures that the office will require as well. If you don't know what those are, you can get a lease checklist from Brian Chung, our transaction coordinator here. And it is a really big pain in the ass. If there's a pool or spa, you have to indicate if there is this anti-entrapment drain cover. If there has been mold in the property owner is going to have to tell you about it, what was done, when it happened, provide reports. Same thing with asbestos, pest control, meth contamination. If there's been a bed bug infestation, Water submeters are this interesting device where a property was all, it's multiple units and it was all originally on one water meter. And so a tenant moving in can't get a separate water bill from the other tenants. These submeters generally go to the main like water entry point, the main pipe going into each unit. And it will calculate how much of the water that specific tenants use. Those numbers are gathered, and then the landlord takes the one water bill, if they're even charging the tenant water, takes the one water bill and divides the total amount due by whatever proportional amount used that one unit has been using. This is not common because it's so complicated. And typically, unless it's a single family residence, the owner pays for water. We'll talk about utilities more in a minute.
Are submeters expensive to install?
No idea. They're so uncommon. Carbon monoxide detectors, smoke alarms, water conserving plumbing fixtures. So we have something called retrofitting in sales. There's a state level requirement, which generally your appraiser and inspectors would point out. In the city of Los Angeles, we have more restrictive requirements for retrofitting. In an escrow, we'd actually have something called the certificate of compliance issued. And that's required by escrow to close any sale in the city of Los Angeles. And it basically verifies that all of the stuff is done, or the company goes out, says it's not done. We will not give you the cert until it's done. Seller pays them, they do it, then they give the cert to escrow. Well, all of these things, they're not checked by anyone because there is no escrow in a lease, but a landlord is responsible for having these same safety measures in place for a tenant. They can get themselves into some really big trouble and or lawsuits if there's an accident, an injury, a death, and it is due to the fact that there were not these safety measures, this retrofitting in place, and the tenant wasn't aware of it. Whether or not the tenant's fine with it, it is required by law. So if your landlord doesn't know anything about this, I would highly recommend that you suggest to them that they hire a retrofitting company to check these things for them. Okay. I think that's pretty much it for the lease listing agreement. Yeah, that's all we need to go over for that. So we're going to talk about what happens after that. So whether or not you're representing a tenant or a landlord, the next step in any lease happening is showings, right? So we all know right now we need to send that annoying PED document out prior to a showing. And let's say, a tenant likes a rental property. What happens from that point is they're going to submit an application. And the application process can be a little different depending upon the agent, the listing agent and or owner's preferences. So it all entails the same steps, but sometimes they tier them. I myself even do it slightly different each time. If I have a property that has tons of interest, I will literally put a package together that says, here's where you can do your credit report. Here's the application. I would like to see these forms of income. I would like these references, with instructions, and, email them to me by such and such time at this email address. But in most instances, I'm taking a tenant's application, I'm reviewing it myself, I'm then sending it to the landlord, and I'm saying, here's this application. This is what I like about it. This is what I'm concerned about. If I have any concerns, what do you think? Would you like to move forward? If they say yes, then at that point, I would contact that applicant, that application tenant, or that tenant application. And I would say, the owners like your application. They'd like to move forward with you. They'd like a credit report. Because I don't like making everyone pay for obtaining a credit report if my clients aren't going to consider them. So I use a service called Rent Spree, and that's RENTSPREE. Why do I like Rent Spree? It's 100% free for the property owner. The listing agent can set up the account free within like 5 minutes, and you can email, use a QR code or send links to prospective tenants. They sign into Rent Spree, pay $30, and you get as the listing agent gets a direct, unaltered copy, so you know it's accurate and honest of the credit report. But the best part is it's a soft credit check. A lot of tenants are hesitant to allow a landlord to pull their credit. One, because they don't like giving out their social security number. Two, because they're concerned it will affect their credit score. So Rent Spree, soft credit check, $30. No one has to have your social. It's
Perfect.
Was that a question?
No, I was saying that's perfect. I mean, everybody feels very apprehensive about putting their social and paying the application fee.
Yep.
So that is awesome.
Yeah,
Definitely
I
use
never
that.
have to worry. Yeah, I get the question all the time. Well, I've already pulled my credit. Can we use my credit report?
Mhm.
No, because we don't know that it's not altered. I don't,
Right.
I don't want to insult anyone, but I'm sorry. You know, we require a credit report. That's from the service. That's part of our application process. But when
Mhm.
we tell them it's a soft credit check, people don't mind anymore. They go ahead and do it right away. All right, so I'm going to pull up the actual application for you now and go over a couple of things. Give me a second.
Hey, Kristen, while you do that, have you ever came across a situation where you would much rather have your client use Rent Spree, but the property management company or just the listing agent rather go about it another way?
Yeah, typically the listing agent and property owner or management company dictates how it's done. They just do. You can always recommend to them. And actually most agents that I show Rent Spree to and I show them how easy it is, they're like, oh, this is great. I'm going to use this. But if they want another way, the tenant just has to do another way. And that's up to the tenant if they want to do it or not. Okay, let me see here. Management companies are bad, really bad. I mean, if you look at, I see lease agreements that are not CAR documents, and a lot of them are like contain completely illegal terms in there. I always think it's so crazy that this professional company and owners paying to protect them from lawsuits and misconduct has, you know, blatantly inaccurate information there. Okay, here we go. Screen share. Here's a rental application. Guys see it?
Mhm. Yep.
Okay. So number one thing to know about an application is anyone over the age of 18 has to provide an application whether or not they're going to be financially responsible. Okay. So all proposed tenants 18 or older have to give you an application. They would indicate if they're just a tenant or tenant with co-tenants. You can have a tenant with a guarantor, someone who's not going to occupy but is going to be financially responsible. Okay. So you're going to need an application from a guarantor as well. Guarantor and or all tenants. Most people don't have a guarantor. You would see that in the instance maybe of someone very young with very little credit history, or someone who's being supported by their family still, or maybe someone with very bad credit that needs a cosigner in order, you know, to be attractive to a landlord. Right? The property address is going to go here. They're going to fill in the rent. When you receive applications, pay very close attention to the rent and the proposed move-in date, okay? Because tenants will write some funny things in here. And they may be writing, oh, you know, our asking price for rent was actually $4,000. We ended up with 42 on this. I would have missed that though if I hadn't looked at the application that said 42. The move-in date is going to be something that's very important to your landlord typically. They don't want to lose money by the property sitting vacant. You'll need to check and make sure, you know, date of birth, like this is actually inaccurate, right? He accidentally put in 21. I'm sure he meant 91. Or I don't know, maybe he meant 81. I don't know. He looked young. So you'll just want to review all of this and make sure that it is, you know, complete. Residence history important because you may be asked by the landlord to verify, particularly during a time with the eviction and rent moratorium, that the tenant has actually been paying rent at their current Rental property. You'll also want to look at their employment and income history so you can just have an idea of what it is that they do. Okay. Now, is that all that you need? No. So we need a credit report. We need an application. What's the third piece of the puzzle, guys?
Finances.
Yeah, finances. And finances, I would break down in two parts. One is verification of employment, and the other is proof of actually having money or pay stubs, right? So it may not be enough for your landlord that someone makes $10,000 a month. They may need to see that they also have, you know, some savings or something. Or you might have someone like me who is self-employed. So I don't have pay stubs, right? Am I going to dig pay stubs or like the portions of my commission checks out of a drawer? Hell no. I provide them a copy of my bank statement, and my if they really want to see anything after they see my bank statement, I give them a copy of the finalized, like you know, after write-offs page of my taxes, my tax return for the most recent year. But most people, you're just going to ask for 3 months of their last pay stubs and or, you know, some sort of a bank account statement. Okay. You may not ask for all of that. The credit may come back stellar, and maybe the landlord is cool with just having, you know, payment stubs, 3 months payment stubs. All right. Now I want you to know one thing very particularly, and this happens with me almost every time I do a lease, is if the landlord asks me to verify the employment or the payment and residence history with the existing or prior landlord, they'll ask me, oh, well, what did that person say? I want you to know that no matter what the person on the phone says to you, legally, the only thing you're allowed to ask about from the employer is, do they work there? How much do they make this amount of money? These are the two things you are allowed to ask. If they tell you, oh, they're a terrible person or anything else, are you allowed to convey that to your client, to the landlord? No.
Nope.
That person on the phone should not be telling you that. By law, you only have the authority to verify the employment and the income. Same thing with the landlord. You are there to find out how long, if they've been a tenant there, and if they've paid their rent on time and up to date. That is it. Okay, so my landlord clients, they're like, well, what did they say? They say he's a nice or quiet tenant. I tell them, I'm sorry, I don't know. My licensure limits me on what I can ask for. Even for you, you know, asking for verification, that's the limit of the law. Like, that's what we can ask for. You're welcome to call yourself if you want, but we're not supposed to ask for that. But you yourself as the agent can't ever do that. Even if you're accidentally given information, you do not transfer that information. It is a complete violation of privacy law and your licensure. All right. I'm going to stop share on the application, and we are going to now look at the lease listing, the actual lease agreement. No. There we go. Okay. Screen share. We're going to be quick about this because a lot of this information I think is pretty self-explanatory. We're going to have the landlord's name up here. We're going to have the property address in here. We're going to have all of the tenants' names here that are adults, everyone 18 and older. And you are going to indicate dependents or children, but you're not going to identify them by name. Okay. So if Darren had 2 children, Darren Yan and his 2 minor children. Okay. You're going to indicate the personal property that's included with the rental. And you do need to do so in section 1C because there are 2 sections about personal property in the lease agreement. One is for stuff that is provided and should be maintained, which is normal. If I'm a tenant, I have a washer, dryer, microwave, stove, and refrigerator, and my stove stops working one day, I do expect that my landlord is going to replace or repair that, right? That's a normal expectation in the rental market. Now, on a rare occasion, there'll be something where That's not the case. The landlord says, this is on its last leg. It was here when I bought it. I am not going to repair or replace this. There's another section for that in the lease agreement, and I will show you where that is. But that is very rare. Okay, so you're going to have the start date of the lease. That's the commencement date. And then you're going to have the termination date. So for this lease, it was a 15-month lease. So that's 15 months. And you would indicate what time they're going to vacate. A lot of people will put 5 o'clock in here. I don't like that because the tenant is paying for this day. So I give them every moment of that day that they paid for. I think that's fair. The rent is identified here. And this is not their first partial payment. This is just what a normal full month of rent payment is going to be, this dollar amount. Okay. So the rent can be made payable on any day. And so we were talking about collecting the first month's rent up front and stuff like that. And so I kind of use my judgment on it. And if the tenant and the landlord are okay with it, if we're going to start the lease close to the 15th of the month, I might just make the rent due and payable on the 15th of the month if the landlord's okay with that. Why? The proration for the move-in cost is going to be a lot easier. But if it's not okay, no problem. I'll show you how to do the proration. But it is industry standard that rent is due on the first of the month. And you'd identify how the rent's going to be paid. There are a lot of options here. It's going to be up to your landlord to stipulate it. But I do want you to know the one rule in the law. You must allow a tenant to not only make electronic payment, but also be able to physically make a payment somewhere. So that means, can you ask for a wire transfer, Venmo, Zelle? Absolutely. However, can you require it? No, you have to allow a tenant to be able to make payment by some sort of paper payment, whether that's personal check, money order, or cashier's check. It is not legal to require electronic payment only. You have to give one option for a physical payment. Okay, you would indicate who rent should be paid to. Okay, sometimes that's one of the owners, sometimes all of them, sometimes that's an entity that they have. You're going to get that information from them. You're also going to provide a contact phone number for whoever the payment's going to, the address at which the payment should be delivered. Okay. Section 3 is about non-sufficient funds. So if a tenant ever fails to pay rent on time, or a check that they make payable for rent bounces, it is legal for the landlord to require the tenant to pay rent, even in cash, for up to 3 months, and all future rent to be paid by money order or cashier's check. Typically, they don't ask for the cash. They just say, I want cashier's check moving forward. Security deposit. You're going to indicate here what the security deposit is. So our rental amount was $4,200, guys. It's an unfurnished place. How much is the maximum I could have put in this line?
8,400.
Price is not.
84. Yeah, 84. And again, this is completely at the discretion of the landlord. Okay. They can do 1 month. Our industry standard is typically 1 to 2 months. It can't be more than 2 months unless it's furnished. Then it can be up to 3 months. All right. And it's always going to be transferred to the owner, not held in our broker trust account. Okay. Look, everyone talks about last month's rent in real estate. I don't know why. There is no such thing as a landlord legally being able to require a last month's rent. And no portion of security deposit should be used for last month's rent. It is allowed to be used for unpaid rent. So if a tenant leaves and doesn't pay their last month, is that security deposit up for grabs to cover that last month of rent? Absolutely. But we do not refer to any security deposit funds or money taken up front at the beginning of a lease as a last month's rent. Okay, so you will have move-in funds, which consist of either rent or security deposit. Okay, no other type of funds will you be collecting, rent or security deposit. Can you collect rent in advance? Absolutely, and typically we do, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So move-in costs received due, you're going to have an amount, a due date, because oftentimes, you secured the lease before the tenant's going to move in. You really want to have the security of having the funds in your hands. Who that the move-in funds are payable to. Now let's talk about how we calculate them out. So what you need to know about real estate prorations is that by law, they are all based on a 30-day month. Okay, so the month of February has 28 days, but that doesn't matter. I calculated on a 30-day month because that is the law. So if my total lease amount is 4,200, I take 4,200, I divide it by 30. Okay, that is my per diem. I write down my per diem. Then, because I know our lease is going to start on the 20th, I count out how many days I need to calculate. So that's from the 20th. If you're looking at the screen, it's rent from the 20th. So 20th, 21st, 22nd, 23rd, 24th, 25th, 26th, 27th, 28th. That is 9 days. So I'm taking my per diem that I calculated out and I'm multiplying it times 9, and I get the figure of 1,260. Now, what is discretionary is, are my landlords going to require the partial month rent and the full payment of the next month's rent? Typically, if this is the partial move-in, the proration here, typically if this is for less than half of a month, I do recommend that the landlord also require upfront as a move-in cost the next full month of rent. Okay. In addition to the security deposit. So guys, if this is exactly what happened, the total is here, 9,660. Can anyone tell me when Darren Yan's first rental payment directly to the owners will take place?
April the 1st.
April 1st. Yeah, April 1st. Because we collected the prorated February rent and we collected all of the March rent. Okay, late charge, return checks. So rent is considered late if a landlord has not received it within 5 calendar days, not business, 5 calendar days from the time it's due. A landlord can charge pretty much anything they want for a late fee. But, you know, if they get crazy and they write something like $500 in here, it's probably going to turn the tenant off. So I generally recommend something to the landlord that's going to sting to deter a tenant from paying their rent late again, but not make it impossible to pay or cause a rift in the relationship. I mean, I think I have accidentally sent my rent check out late once because I was on vacation and partying. I did not think about my rent. I was thinking about shots and the beach. So when I got home, I was very happy, not happy, but I was fine with paying my, you know, $100 or $150, whatever it was. So I do recommend something between $100 and $200 at the maximum. Okay. Parking is not always included with the lease amount, but usually it is. So you need to identify if it is or not. And if it is, you would indicate so here and say where they can legally park and indicate that it is included in the rent. Now, on occasion, it's not. Maybe it's a 10-unit building and there's only 8 spaces and the tenants pay an additional $75 a month for a rental parking or to rent a parking space. So you would indicate that as is not and the additional amount, and you would say where that parking is. There's not a place on this document to say where this parking is, right? So you're going to add an addendum and indicate which parking spot it is, because you're a great agent and you're better than this document is. All right, same thing with storage, filled out exactly the same way. All right, did we have a question? No, okay. Section 9, utilities. The way that the lease agreement is written indicates that the tenant is going to pay all utilities except. So keep that in mind when you're filling it out. This is all negotiable, but I'll tell you what industry standard is. Typically, a landlord pays for water and, if it's a single family, typically a landlord pays only for gardener and or pool maintenance if there's a pool, okay? The tenant would pay for everything, including water. In a multifamily, because there are common areas where utilities are used for the benefit of all the tenants, it is common that the landlord pays for water, gardener, if there's a pool. So what's the difference there? Multifamily, owner typically pays for water. Single family, tenant typically pays for water. there will be deviations from this, and your landlord or the landlord will indicate that to whoever you are in the transaction, whether you represent them or you represent the tenant. So do you remember when I told you if you take a lease listing, you probably want to bust out the lease agreement as well? Because you'll want to know things like this, because potential tenants and their agents will ask you what utilities are included, and you will need to know. It is a question in the MLS. So I always recommend taking out whatever subsequent agreement supports whatever type of listing agreement you are completing, because you'll want to compile a list of questions so you're an educated listing agent. Okay, condition of premises. There are several ways to do this, but I highly recommend that for section 10, you only use what's C. And that is called a MIMO form, which stands for move in, move out. And that is where literally prior to the commencement of the lease, the tenant walks through with either the landlord direct or with an agent, and everyone indicates and agrees to what the current condition of the property is. And there's this big, long, extensive checklist that is a very good guide so that you include everything. Now, I do want to point out here, I didn't mention it about the lease listing or the lease agreement. If you are renting a furnished property, there should be an itemized list of every single possession that is included in that lease. And that can be annoying and time consuming. I mean, we are talking down to utensils, which is obviously labor intensive, right? And then your move in, move out, having a tenant inspect and confirm the condition and existence of these items, that's time consuming as well. And then when they move out, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to confirm there's one column that's for move in, one column that's for move out. You could do, I guess, a video also, but our office generally asks for the MIMO, and to protect yourself from liability, particularly with the furnished unit, I would recommend using this MIMO form that you can get in zip forms. There's something else you should know. You wouldn't typically be involved in this as an agent, but there's something called a pre-move out inspection. A landlord is 100% required to, within, I think it's 2 weeks of a tenant indicating they're going to vacate a property, give what is referred to as a pre-move out inspection. And this is for the landlord to go in and identify anything that they would potentially charge the tenant from their security deposit for after the tenant leaves. And we're not talking about normal wear and tear and cleaning. That's not allowed. But let's say there's a hole in the wall. I'm the tenant. I request a pre-move out inspection. That landlord is going to come in and say, yeah, I would charge you to fix this. Why is that law in place? It's in place to allow me as a tenant the opportunity to go and fix things so that I can get my security deposit back, so that I feel that it is a fair and equal, like a fair price, right? So that I'm not shocked and depending upon these return of my security deposit funds when I'm not going to get them. All right. Section D, tenant will provide landlord a list of items that are damaged or not in operable condition within 3 or blank days after commencement date. Man, I don't know about you, but when I move, my life is living hell for like an entire month. I certainly have not figured out everything that is broken or not working within the first 3 days of my occupying. I'm not even occupying. I'm just moving boxes and garbage and sweating during these 3 days. So I like to write in 10 days. It actually gives a tenant some time to settle in and notice things. Is this really a requirement? Are they required by law to do it within this time frame? No, a landlord has to fix anything that's not working. The purpose of this is to try to make it easy so the landlord's not getting piece requests as a new tenant discovers little thing after little thing after little thing. This is to save everyone just, the inconvenience of a constant back and forth and having the cost of sending someone out for something minor over and over again in the first month or two. Okay. All right, section 11A is about maintenance. Tenant is responsible for maintaining everything and also for notifying a landlord if there's any problems, even if the tenant is not required to maintain it. So if there is, a leak from the roof, but the tenant fails to tell the landlord, hey, there's been a leak in this roof for a month, you know, the tenant is in breach of contract. The tenant is supposed to notify the landlord, you know, of something like that, because if the landlord has no knowledge of this, we can have mold, we can have further problems. It's a big problem. So tenant, even if they're not responsible for maintenance, is responsible for notifying the landlord if there's a problem. Okay, you're going to indicate under section B whether or not the tenant or the landlord is going to not actually do the gardening, but water the garden. Okay, so if we're in a single family and the tenant is paying for the water, I'm going to say the tenant's responsible for watering. Even though we have automatic sprinklers that are on a timer, I'm going to say it's the tenant's responsibility to ensure that they're actually watering the property. As far as gardening, which is the maintenance part, that's a landlord responsibility. These are all negotiable. You're going to find it different every time. I just want you to know the difference between watering and maintaining. Okay, landlord tenant shall maintain. Remember, I told you there would be that separate section for something maybe like, oh, you know, maybe there is a space heater in the backyard, an outdoor heater. And the landlord says, it's on its last leg. It was here when I bought it. I'm not going to pay to replace it, but the tenant's welcome to use it. You know, that's where I'd put something in here, you know, that, you know, outdoor heater, you know, shall be, tenant's welcome to use it, but landlord will not repair or replace it. Okay. Same thing here. You can use section G. Okay. Or if there's anything that the landlord wants the tenant to do, you could put it in section D. All right. Pets, if there's going to be a pet, even if, okay, so if there's going to be a pet, you need to have a pet addendum. The acronym for it is really easy, PET. It's going to identify whether or not the landlord has to carry insurance, the tenant has to carry an insurance policy covering that pet. Smoking is by state law not allowed unless the landlord makes an exception. And even if the landlord wants to make an exception, you should advise them not to. Why? If they're going to allow smoking of certain substances outside, because it might keep their insurance company from covering them in the case of a fire or something like that, or an accident that's related to their tenant smoking. Rules, regulations, if there is an HOA, the landlord has to provide a copy of the CC&Rs, rules and regulations, house rules, anything like that from the HOA to the tenant. That means you as the agent have to get them, right? So if you're renting a condo, it's not that simple. You need to get the HOA documentation from the seller, who very well may not have it. So you're going to need to get in touch with the HOA management company. I think someone put something in the chat box, but I can't see it because I'm doing screen share, guys.
It says, is the landlord or tenant responsible for costs involved with pest control during the tenancy?
Depends. Is the pest issue caused by the tenant's lack of cleanliness? Tenant's responsible if it's caused by the tenant's use or lack of maintenance. If it's just a problem, the landlord's responsible for it. If it's the problem of an external source, like a neighbor, another unit, landlord source. It's very hard for a landlord to prove that as something is tenant caused, even if it's really clear to the landlord, right? So I typically just advise the landlord to take care of it the first time or two, even if it looks like it's a tenant problem, and issue a warning to the tenant that they're going to take care of it, but they'll need to maintain the property in this condition and itemize whatever that condition is, or they'll be charged next time. All right. Alterations, repairs, a tenant will have, if they make any alterations to a property, they're going to have to either get the landlord to say, oh, no problem, we approve that, or get approval from the landlord, and the landlord says, yeah, you can do that, but you're going to have to pay to return it to its original condition. Okay. Keys, locks, you're going to indicate here how many keys or remote controls, whatever devices you're giving to the tenant here. And I really hate this section, 18B. You have to indicate whether or not the premises has been rekeyed. No tenants even think about this issue until they see section B. When you say it has not been rekeyed, what do you think the automatic response from a tenant is? can the landlord rekey it? Have fun with that, guys. That's negotiable, obviously, between the landlord and the tenant. Okay, I think that's pretty much it. No subletting, tenants cannot sublet, it's not legal in the state. Possession, if the landlord's not able to provide the property to the tenant within 5 days of the initial agreed upon commencement date, the tenant can walk away from the property and the landlord is legally required to give them all their money back. But the landlord does have 5 days. Okay, so possession is deemed terminated not until all keys have been returned to the landlord. So if a tenant moves out, cleans, gets the place empty, gives proper notice, technically possession is not terminated until the tenant actually gives the keys to the landlord or their agent. All right, tenant's obligations upon vacating the premises, all the keys have to be returned, everything needs to be clean, and no debris, and there has to be the proper notice. We talked about pre-move out inspection already. You yourself don't really need to be concerned with it, but you should know what it is. So I would recommend reading this. You may need to provide a form to your landlord if they ask about it. We're not going to go over breach of contract or early termination of lease. I'd stay out of that one and refer your landlord or tenant to an attorney if they want to terminate a lease early. If the landlord wants the tenant to carry a liability insurance policy, you would indicate how much so here. You would probably need to know that up front and put it on the MLS. It's not that uncommon, and renters insurance policies are really cheap. So when you're explaining this to renters, they may not know this and they might think it's a pain in the ass and pass on the lease because of it. You can tell them this can be as cheap as like 15 bucks a month, maybe even cheaper. I think I had one for $8 a month once. Okay, notices. So the tenant has to have a place where they can legally serve a legal notice to the landlord. So you have to have an address here. See. That's it, guys. We're good. Any questions?
Yeah, I do. After the completion of the lease, or even prior to the completion, do you have an attorney review it just to
No.
make sure everything's good?
Nope. Attorneys typically aren't involved in our transactions. The only time an attorney would get involved is when the client has one and wants to involve one, or there's a problem. We're not like other states where a real estate attorney is usually involved. Yay, us. We only get paid for one job. We do both.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Kristen, can you please say something about the rent free again? Is that when they credit your check without having your social security number? I'm sorry, I missed it.
Talking about rent spree? I can't understand you. Yeah.
Rent free, what does it do? Does it check your credit score? Credit? I see.
Go to rentspree.com and check it out. It's super user friendly. You don't even need to ask me a question.
Okay, okay.
Any more questions?
No, thank you, thank you.
Okay. There's no more
I
questions.
have a question.
Okay.
Do you have any recommendations for tenant landlord attorneys for referral in case
And I
we need?
hope I never
Okay. Where can we find that? Because it's kind of hard to find someone that's good, you know, that's can help a tenant or client or your landlord mostly.
You might want to ask Mike Rosales. He's an attorney also, not just our. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else, guys? No? Okay.
No.
Bye.
Bye.